Good evening, everyone. The time is now 5:01 p.m. and the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees are now convened in a workshop on Monday, December 11, 2023. A quorum of board members is present. Note for the record that Mr. Flora is not here, but he's on his way. This meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The first item on the agenda is public comments. Becca, do we have anybody signed up? No public comments. We'll move on to the board workshop. Go 5, Facilities Master Plan. Dr. Smith.
Board, thank you for being here tonight. We're excited to host this meeting at Burrell Elementary School, which is going to open its doors to hundreds of students coming up here soon. So thank you for your leadership and flexibility so we can host our first meeting here. Tonight for our workshop, we're going to be going into a Facilities Master Plan as part of the KPMs, or Key Progress Measures, that our administration presents to you every year. This is one of the big pieces of work under maximizing our resources for both short and long-term goals as a school district. This KPM is important to us, we know, as we continue to grow and have facility needs as a school district. We have to have a clear, understandable master plan so that it helps guide our work along the way. And so tonight, Mike's going to be presenting to you some information, asking you for some feedback so that we can put final touches on this master plan. Again, Michael mentioned to you this is going to be a work in progress along the way, but we want to have a product to present to you in January so that it can be the foundation for our facilities work moving forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Thank you all for being here tonight. So I know that this seems like one of a series of facilities discussions we've had this fall, and one that I'm very, very happy to have and very excited about. Tonight's going to be a little more of a conversation. It's not, we're not going to present a lot of data to you. We will next month come back with a report on the master plan and let y'all kind of see the work we've been doing and kind of where we go and what our needs are going to be, what we anticipate over the next 10 and 15 years or so. Let's see. But like I say, tonight is a night of a little bit. We're going to touch on about 3 big topics, and we're going to take opportunities to get feedback from you on each of those. So we are going to discuss certain elements of long-range planning, and specifically to our long-range master plan. So just a quick review. We've talked about this several times, and we've gotten a little feedback from you in the past, but it's really what we're trying to accomplish here is a roadmap for planning, designing, constructing, and maintaining our district facilities. A true master plan, we're going to try to be as inclusive as we can of what we anticipate all of our needs are going to be, so that when it's time to have those discussions about what we're able to do, we'll kind of know and be able to go through prioritization projects, things like that, and know, with each year what the needs of the district are going to be. And so it's not only for a standpoint of, and I think we've shared this with you, so it's a master plan isn't just about facilities. It has to be a melding of the 4 legs to the stool, as you can see on the diagram there. So one of the big elements is demographics, and we're going to slow down tonight and really engage with you in a kind of a discussion around demographics. We bring in our friends from Zonda twice a year, and we share with you what we're finding in demographics and kind of what the projections are. And tonight we're going to be able to slow that down just a little bit and kind of get some feedback on y'all on what you see in that data and what the things you feel really good about and what things concern you moving forward with what we're seeing over the next decade or so from our projections. We also, with our facility assessment, knowing what we have, knowing what our capacities are, and those sorts of things, that we're going to do an activity around North Belton Middle School tonight and kind of look at some options of some things coming down the road for that campus that might be applied to other campuses as well. And then finally, when we have time left at the end, we're going to talk to you just a little bit that as a board of trustees, what do you need from us and when do you need it so that you can really make good decisions and so you can be thinking down the road too on facility planning. So those are the 3 things that we want to try to accomplish today. There is a packet at each of your spots where rather than having to flip back and forth through slides, I didn't pull the full presentation, but only the data points, so that whenever we have our discussions and we frame some questions for discussion for you in a minute, that you'll be able to refer back to the data as you're having those discussions. So the first thing we want to do is kind of consider implications of current demographic data on our system. And so I pulled these 2 specific slides from the Zonda. Won't go through it campus by campus, year by year, but you can see this first slide It's from our Fall 23 demographic report, and it gives you includes our new campuses, Burrell Elementary and Hubbard Branch, and gives you a year-by-year projections all the way up to the 2033-34 school year. If you remember the ones we have seen previously, there's not nearly as much red and yellow as we've seen on some of our past slides. Just for reference on any of the Zonda information, if you see green, that means that it is at or near 95% capacity, and then if you see yellow, that means that's the point in time whenever it hits or exceeds capacity. And then the next slide is our secondary demographic projections. Once again, it's from the Fall 2023 demographic report. You see a little more green and a little more yellow on this one, and whenever we dive into the data, we'll be able to take a closer look at that. One thing that these charts do as well, if you look down at the darker blue section below all of the schools, it has elementary totals. That is the overall capacity for all of our facilities and kind of where we are and where we will be. So as you look at individual campuses, I think it's also one of the activities we'll do with North Belton is look at where we are overall district-wide in middle school capacity, in this case elementary, and then you can see that for middle school and high school overall capacities there at the bottom of each section. So this is one that we shared this with our long-range facilities planning team. And this is kind of a comparison. So in the fall of 2019 is when we opened Charter Oak Elementary, and that's also when we released what would be the zones for the addition of BMS, the addition of Lake Belton High School. So we thought it would be interesting to go back and compare what our four-year-old or fall of 2019 projections were for all of our current and campuses, what our fall of 2022, so last year when we got our fall demographic update, where those projections lay, and then what our 2023-2024 actual enrollment were just close to our snapshot date in October. So what our TEA snapshot data is what we tried to use for this comparison. And I will point out, and not to interpret the data for you because we're going to ask y'all to do that. So you can see though, as an overall trend for the district, you see some slight increases and decreases between the fall 2019 projections and the fall 22 projections, but we also we're pretty consistent overall about what our actual enrollment is compared to what our projections were. A few exceptions, you can see that the New Tech is under what our fall 2019 projections were in our 22 projections and in our actual, and it's almost the same amount of where we are over at Lake Belton High School. And then you can see a couple of the elementary schools were a little under what our projections were. So our fall 22 projection at Sparta, at Lakewood, at Charter Oak are a little under. Everything else came in pretty tight to what we've seen. And then obviously our fastest growth areas of Tarver and Chisholm Trail, you can kind of see how they step up where our actual enrollment's a little higher than what the projections were.
Mike, can you go back one?
Yes.
I think Michael hit this a little bit on projection accuracy coming up, but I think it's important to note this graphic right here does not mean that the schools aren't growing. This means that this was the demographer projection and we were over or under a little bit. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands this isn't meaning we're losing enrollment, which other districts are in that situation. That is not Belton ISD. This means that based on what Bob Templeton said, we came in a little over or a little under.
And that's a great point because that red data point, the fall 22 projections, each one of those included growth. So that was the growth that we were expected to see from 21 to 22 or to 23, and then that's the actual growth. So all of these campuses grew, just some didn't grow by as much as the initial projections were. And you can kind of see, I think it's important to look at the accuracy. So overall, These were the campuses where the projections were within 1% of the total student population. So you can see there at Southwest and Pirtle. So take Pirtle, for instance, a campus with over 900 students. Our projection was 2 students under, or our actual enrollment was 2 students under where our projection was. Southwest Elementary was 1 student over where our projection was. So when you look at about a third of our campuses were within 1%, and the overall district we were only off by about 1.26% of what the projected enrollment was. So we did grow by well over 200 students this year. We just didn't grow by the 350 or so that the original projection had said. So we still have a net increase. We still have a net increase in almost every campus. It just isn't quite as quickly. And as he discussed in October, several factors can lead into that. A lot of it has to do with house prices and interest rates and what that's done to the housing market to slow things a little bit. Although, when you drove in this afternoon, it doesn't look like things are slowing around here. There's a lot of house construction going on in this attendance zone. So there's a few things, and we're gonna kind of do a model to partner up. And since Chris isn't here yet, I'll ask Rucker and Suzanne if y'all could have a conversation, Jeff and Dr. Golden, and then Manuel and Matt, and then Aaron and Janet. But I've got a couple of things we want to look at. So as you see this, and you look at the campus by campus 10-year projections, you look at kind of where our actual enrollment hits as opposed to some of our projected enrollments, and you look at the closeness that some of the projections actually have come out. We're going to spend a few minutes kind of talking about the demographic data. You know, what do you see in there that's really intriguing to you? What might you have questions about? Where do you see the challenges? Where do you see the things that are the most interesting? And really in terms of short and long-term planning. So what sticks out to you that is kind of short-term on our list, and what are some things that we need to have a good plan for down the road? So we'll take a few minutes, and then we'll each have some time to share out so we can capture your thoughts and discussion.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
Does this data include like transfers, like students that are?
It does. He has a historical
Okay.
number of transfers, and so we go with kind of, we've
Intra-
been within about 3.4 to 3.6% transfers, and so he figures that in whenever he does the estimates.
First thought would be,
Looking at everything, are we looking at the?
I think we're just looking at the data we've looked at so far.
it's like he's predicting the future, you know? And those
Intriguing,
where
challenging,
he's off, it's
or
like
interesting.
minute, it's insignificant, right?
Well, actually,
So, I guess the first question in my mind, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna,
very
without
intriguing.
looking at anything, so when are we gonna fill up, and which ones are gonna fill up, and when do we need to
we have a
take
lot of
it?
time, which we didn't have. You got
Tell me, you look at this, and tell me.
Which a few years
I was
ago, we
talking to
didn't.
Mike,
All of
you
these
tell
were
me,
green and
you tell
red.
me, what are you saying? When are we gonna be over capacity? Ideally, when do we start taking actions? When do we start planning?
These are all considered secondary
High school,
campuses, right? Yeah,
when do we
secondary.
look at another,
Yeah.
Yeah,
how much time do we have?
like for this one, for me,
So we're actually
you take Lake Belton High School, the capacity was
on our high schools,
2,500.
and here's why, although I'm not gonna say this publicly.
So next year, that's the elementary.
We can,
So right there, so your capacity is 2,500. This year we were at 2,288.
into here,
And then you see that you go down to the yellow part, and that's where you're getting within 5% there. And then you don't really go over until that next year, 31, 25, 33. And so that's 30 kids.
I mean,
That's something you could make.
total
You know what I
there.
mean? That's not adding
Yeah, that's the other question, how many,
4,600.
how much capacity?
Yeah.
do
We have capacity of 30.
See, in my feeling on this, from my opinion, those are manageable numbers all the way out until 23, 24.
I mean, isn't that what you're gonna end up doing?
20, up to 24.
But you do have.
So, for the next 10 years?
So I think you're in really good shape right there. Where I think the interesting part really starts to come in is that you could actually, you can go on pretty tall to be able to balance things out. Because future bond, dollar amount for a new high school is going to be astronomical, right? So it's going to take a while to get to that point, but Belton High School got a capacity of 2,600, and by the end of 2033, looking at the 90s. And then you got new tech in there as well until 2028, 29. So I think there's growth management strategies, you know, that we can work through. Middle school is the one that's a little tighter in my estimation, because you're over in 2 schools at that point, and then you're wasting so much space. You shift some kids from the north to the south. No, sorry, this is South Belton, or a little bit more. You're in good shape again. So I think, just from my
We got 10 years.
point of view at the secondary level, we're good. I think this one is interesting to me, Hubbard Branch, because Hubbard Branch is 809 kids by the end of the decade. And so that would put that as the biggest elementary school. And then how fast that river farms.
Really? Is it easier than?
Yep. The Chisholm Trail, you see, doesn't
I guess you
have
just don't know
over
the
capacity.
Maybe it
After
does.
we
Basically.
So I think he's in good shape. I think
Okay.
but he's still gonna feel pinched a little bit, right? Because you're, I mean, next year they're gonna be jumping for joy, they're going to almost 200 kids. But it's still gonna feel, you know, a little tight sometimes until you fill up.
It's not saying there's gonna be more housing being built.
So looking at this, where's the need going to be?
Either way, it's big picture.
My personal belief is you have to take a look at middle school, high school, and really think about attendance boundary things. Because I think we have some significant capacity to play with in here for elementary.
So it's going to be a middle school.
Look at this. Your capacity at elementary is 9,200, and you'd be at 7,500.
It automatically raises, I know the way the numbers work.
And you can utilize that stuff well, right? But you get back here to the secondary level, and you start cutting it a little closer. And I think this is right here, 3,800 capacity, 3,600 students.
The middle school would be the
I mean,
next.
that's why we said the numbers are a joke,
Because I think, you know,
it's all
the
based on
idea
going to school
of
there.
really
But yeah, you're right.
options. So when I look at Mike's question about what's intriguing, challenging, or interesting, I think it's there's some variation between the different levels.
No.
Elementary level looks pretty darn good. Obviously, we're adding 2 elementary schools right now, right? Middle school and high school, a little bit more, we have to be a little more planful on. I think the intriguing piece for me is that South Belton Middle School enrollment numbers and Belton High School enrollment numbers. And what might be able to be done.
And then you would,
If you were able to shift those attendance boundaries just a little bit, take 100 kids off, 200 kids off from the north, and then you do south, you might be in really good shape. The one thing that
Have you added
you know, Mike will get to in this too, the demographer is then only growth.
Let's take a few minutes and kind of share out. We want to hear your feedback and kind of when you look at this data, what are the things that are intriguing, challenging, or interesting for you? Who would like to start? Very good.
That was a good move.
yeah, you do, don't you? Yeah. We were talking about the new tech, if it's sustainable. The numbers are not as high as what, were projected, and wanting to see that continue to be the campus of choice for BISD for more than just a few years, but, decades in the future. Looking at the numbers, elementary seems to be the most stable compared to secondary, but in the secondary, specifically in the middle school, you look at North and Lake, and North already being at the 95th percentile in attendance next year, and then you look at the 2 southern campuses, you have capacity moving forward. You look 3 or 4 years out and you're at 92, 94% in the northern campuses, but the southern ones are about 71%. So you might be looking at attendance boundaries to hold those 4 schools and keep capacity. So we talk more about long-term, and then of course, Lake Belton High School.
One and Jeff, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go. I think the interesting thing for us looking at this, I was telling Dr. Golden, compared to, I guess it would just been Suzanne and myself on the board, but looking at these numbers back 2015, 2016, the elementary schools were horrifying to look at because, I mean, you gotta look at how many we've built since then, but I mean, I remember the first time I ever saw this report laid out, it was like, oh my gosh, what did I get into on this? Because everything was just red across there. It was like, hey, just so you know, in 3 years, we're going off a cliff and we don't have room for kids. But you see what the planning does, and now elementary, like you said, it's stable. That actually, and so when I look at the next page, I don't freak out quite as bad, because if you start looking at the numbers, there's areas of movement, there's things that can be done. We're not adding 800 kids a year right now, and that certainly helps. And then, you know, talking about like this campus right here, we're finally to the situation like we were when we built Lake Belton High School, and I told Principal Manley the other day, you know, her first year or two in this school is going to feel really weird. It's going to be a lot of open space and not many kids, but that is the way you want it, and that's what we have to do. When we opened Lake Belton, we started with the 2 classes. Remember, we had halls that were blocked off because they didn't need the space, and you know, now it's got the students in it, and that is what you want. Gabby had told me a story about opening a campus. It's 50% capacity, and then the next year was already over capacity. That's just not a world that I ever want to live in. So that was our main thing, was just, you know, with proper planning and doing the right things, this elementary school picture is so different now than it was in 2015. It was like, oh no, we are in so much trouble. We're never going to be able to keep up with this. So that was what we looked at. And then Dr. Golden also had some different ideas about, you were talking about the north campuses and south campuses for the
attendance capacity?
well, yeah, for, you know, the difference in our middle schools, and what she had mentioned was, you know, that's when maybe you, yeah, nothing specific, but maybe you look at adding special programs to some of those campuses in the south that would attract students to go there, you know, because maybe it fits their mold or whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Would y'all like to go next?
Sure. I'm going to echo everything that you guys have already said, but it looks like we don't have to run for the hills for at least 10 years, right? I mean, if there's things we can do, if nothing else changed, you know, rushing to build things or whatever, it looks like 10 years we can manage it if we had to. But one of the things that I told Dr. Smith is, personally, I think that in the next couple of years, we're going to explode again. When the interest rates start to take the dip again, because there's too many lots for sale here in our district, and those things are going to fill up, you know, once things start moving this way again from the south. I think when we look at this 2 years from now, this is going to look completely different in my view. So we got to think that, because when I look at it now, oh, that looks pretty good. We can manage that by changing attendance boundaries, like Dr. Smith said, moving things this way or that way. But I don't think that's going to happen, because we're living, you know, things are calm right now, but the storm's coming. I think that's going to happen here in the next couple of years, especially after the election next year, perhaps. 9%, 8% interim construction, 9.75, nothing's happening. You get that thing down to about 5, here we go.
Aaron, Janet, Chris?
I feel like that's a great point, perspective. We didn't talk about that. I think ultimately, we're looking good elementary-wise. Secondary, we need to keep our eyes really peeled closely to. So I think we talked about both points that you two made. But be ready for
I think it's coming.
when the storm's lifted, that the in-houses are selling a lot faster again.
We did have a question about South Belton Middle School, sitting right in between 2 of our largest elementaries. I mean, our fastest growing elementaries, and why their numbers are so low. So we need to maybe look at, is that a zoning issue, or is that a transfer issue, or what is going on there? Because it should be the biggest middle school, the most populated.
Good point.
Everybody good?
What they all said.
So, One of the things that y'all mentioned and we anticipated would be that North Belton Middle School might be one of the things that's either interesting or concerning, because it is, when you do look at our campuses, it's one of a couple of hot spots that is gonna hit sooner than some of the others. And so we thought it might be interesting to take a few minutes, take a little deeper dive into the data for North Belton, start to talk about some potential strategies that could be used there, and then kind of get feedback from you guys on that as well. So I took the info from the report you just looked at and pulled it out specifically to North Belton Middle School, so you can see the color code is the same. The green is at 95% capacity. The yellow is when we get at or over capacity, and you can see a through line there at 1,000, which is where the design capacity is for that building. So when the architects built that building, they designed it for an average of 1,000 students. And we'll talk a little bit about how functional capacity kind of plays into that as well. The current enrollment there at snapshot was 917. I think it's actually up just a little bit from then, but you can kind of see we've got 2 to 3 years where we're going to be close to the design capacity, and then from that point on, we're going to be over the design capacity. A little bit about past enrollment at that campus. So those of you, as Jeff mentioned, kind of that 2015, 16, 17, prior to opening BMS in 2018-19, we had over 1,000 students. We had 1,032 students at North Belton, and in 2019-20, the year before BMS opened, and we went back to a four middle school, we had over 1,100 students in that building. So North Belton has seen crowded conditions before. One of the things that when you look at design capacity, that is the capacity as the building was designed. When you tell an architect we need a building that could support 1,000 students, then you get a design like we got at North Belton that could support 1,000 students. When you actually look into the programming of that building, you actually get to a number more of what functional capacity is. So meaning if a classroom is used for, and I'll go with I'll go with the middle school example. If a classroom is used for English instruction, 8th grade English, when you figure your functional capacity, you're going to figure that classroom at 25 students. Now, we all know not every classroom has 25 students. Some may have 31, some may have 18, but when you average it out, you average like a core gen ed classroom at 25 students. That classroom could also be used to support a special program. So let's say that our AIMS program would be supported by that classroom. That classroom you may only have 3 students in it if it supports an AIMS program, or if it supports a functional academics classroom, it may have 12 students in it. So when you figure functional capacity, you take those same rooms that the architect designed to sustain 1,000 students, and you look at each individual room and look at what is that room being used for, and then apply that formula. 25 for a gen ed classroom, 10 for a sped classroom, 0 if it's a pull-out room. So if it's a room that doesn't support students period by period throughout the day, but you may be pulling 2 or 3 students from all the other classrooms that are being used, some spaces would have a 0 impact on functional capacity. So that being said, if every room, and we did a functional capacity exercise last year, and we'll do another one again next year whenever the new middle school or the new elementary schools open. When we did a functional capacity exercise, if every room was at maximum capacity of students as to what the current programming is, 100% functional capacity would be 1,300 students in that campus. Now, you couldn't actually support 1,300 because you're never going to have enough restroom space, you're not going to have enough cafeteria space, you're not going to have enough queuing for pickup and drop off, you're not going to have enough gym space, all of those sorts of things. So when a building operates, all of the research and data that we could find says that buildings tend to operate best when it's about 80 to 85% of its functional capacity. So if you look at a functional capacity of 1,300, at 80%, we would be at about 1040, which is where we were in 2018-19. At 85%, we're at about 1105. So once you get to that 85%, your core facilities, your library, gym, restrooms, cafeteria, lunch serving lines, equipment, all those sorts of things are really going to be stressed. So just to put things in perspective, we are nearing that 80 to 85% utilization at North Belton sooner than later. Does that make sense? And there's gonna be some pretty detailed info about that in the master plan. Lots of examples about design capacity, functional capacity. If you change the programming of the rooms, how does that impact it? But we're around that 80 to 85% number right now, and we will be within the next 2 to 3 years.
Mike, I think a good pause there real quickly is,
Yes.
that's a typical usage for a campus, am I right?
For a secondary campus, yes.
And so what's similar, do you have an idea, similar number for elementary?
Yeah, elementary can go a little higher because you typically have your core classrooms that are always going to be assigned that same group of kids, and then you just have your pull-out spaces that will not have kids permanently assigned. So one of the big differences when you talk functional capacity, at a middle school or a high school, you would go ahead and assign a number to that gymnasium because there's going to be classes in there throughout the day. At an elementary school, you wouldn't assign a number of functional capacity to that gymnasium because when the kids go there, no other kids are going to their classroom to receive instruction because you're not on a scheduled day. You don't have kids rotating in and out of classrooms all day long. So you're actually, some of your core spaces in a secondary school will count towards your functional capacity in an elementary school. But yeah, elementary school should have a higher utilization rate because you hope to have kids in every classroom if you're nearing capacity.
And I bring that up just for the board to consider when we're planning for long-term on things like this. It's not realistic to have 100% utilization. And I think sometimes general public says, well, you're not at capacity yet. Well, 80 to 85% at the secondary level, 90% at the elementary level is really about what you're shooting for. There will be sometimes you're over a little bit, sometimes you're under a little bit. And, but I think sometimes in the general public, you get the question of, well, you've got 400 seats left in this, at the middle school level. Why do you need another building? Well, there's various reasons for that.
Quick question, on your Chisholm Trail capacity, that does not include the portables?
It does not include the portables.
So something's not clicking in for me with these numbers in North Belton, right? Because on the chart, we're talking about capacity being 1,000, but we just said, okay, well, we said functional capacity is about 1,300. Mm-hmm. And we say 80%, right, is 1040, right? That takes us out through 2031, right? I'm just going
Yes,
off.
it gets us to about that point. So the one thing the architect doesn't know when they design a building is they don't know what we're going to use each one of those individual rooms for. So
So your Bob Templeton number is based on architectural capacity.
Right.
so
So
that
the
1,300
so the coloring on these, we need to pay more attention to that number. Okay.
That's what exactly
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
But even like in an elementary school, though, that number at 100% or is assuming every single classroom is full to whatever it's designed. So even in an elementary school, you may start to feel the pressure prior to hitting that design capacity because every classroom's full, but every classroom may not have 22 or 25 students in it. So that's where some of the layover comes in. But we do want to start working towards discussions in terms of functional capacity because some of the strategies we're going to look at in a minute is that's one of the ways that you can relieve pressure on a campus is look at what your programming is, look at the participants in that programming, and is there an opportunity maybe to move to do programming at another campus and whereas you're only utilizing a classroom that is for instruction for 10 students, where you might could put something else in that classroom where you could have 25 or 30 students in that classroom. So that's where some of the art of master planning or master scheduling and deciding course offerings at a campus and things like that comes into play, where you can maximize that use. When you start, if your design capacity is 1,000 and you only have 800 students in the school, you got a lot more room to play with. But when you start getting to that, then it really gets a lot tighter on how you're using your space.
So Mike, in terms of planning, do we make decisions whether we're going to build another structure based upon functional capacity or this?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that the first discussions would be you make discussions around master schedule, course offerings, and programming based on that functional capacity. So if you have a large number of classrooms that are only serving a small number of students, you may have to look at how can we get more students into those spaces. And it may mean you utilize your rooms differently throughout the day. It may mean that each teacher does not have their, a full room to themselves during their conference period. It may be some more shared shared planning spaces, PLC rooms and things like that, where that's how you increase your utilization, is by making sure that something instructionally is going on in as many rooms as possible throughout the day.
I think you gotta marry both of them.
Yeah.
And you gotta be able to.
Gotta look at the tables side by side.
You do, and you gotta be able to keep an eye on what are our buildings built for, and are we getting to a danger point? But then functionally, how are they being used? I'll use this structure that we're in tonight as an example. There is more specialized space built into this building for that exact reason, because some of our other elementary campuses, there weren't specific classrooms built in for some programs, and that takes your overall capacity down some. And so the design at this was specifically planning with students with special needs as a part of the core function of your school, to make sure that those programs were taken care of here and you weren't moving them all over the place. So I think those are things the board's got to keep in mind. In the administration, we have to keep in mind is looking at those two things side by side, what's functional reality and what's architectural design.
Would it be possible at all ever to have a column for that, like a functional capacity column?
Yes, we're hoping with our master plan, and we got feedback from our long-range planning team and from our leadership team, principals and directors. We want the very first section of the plan is a lot of that's going to be devoted to a discussion around capacity, functional capacity and design capacity, and getting to some common language where, and then we can do each year when the master schedules are built, we can take those rooms, look at what those rooms are being used for, and figure out, are we maximizing our use of that space? So I absolutely think that we could get there. I don't know, haven't had a detailed conversation with our demographer on how comfortable they are, but I think if we front load, maybe with some future workshop and things like that around it, and show specific examples, maps of campuses, and go room by room and look. I think I would like to get to the point where we could kind of speak in terms of design and functional capacity, because that would be a great way to tell the story of a campus has a capacity of 800, but prior to hitting 800 students, we're already feeling like we need portables. Well, it has to do with programming and what the offerings are at that campus as well. So that's kind of where the two marry to each other, and it's not an exact science, and that's what makes it so tricky. It just depends on how you use the space that you have and what your programming needs are.
Yeah, and even a principal could change that capacity, the functional capacity around just by how they're utilizing
Yes.
or choosing
Right.
to move their staff around.
Very
Well,
true.
and Matt spoke well about, this campus has a lot of space for special programs. It also has a maker space. It also has a science lab. It also has a motor lab. Those are three things that we have on a lot of our other campuses. There just wasn't in the original design in the 80s or 90s or whenever, there wasn't a space devoted to that. So we're using a space that was originally intended for something else, to have a maker space, to have a science lab, to have a motor lab, some of those sorts of things. So.
But how do we, thinking about all that, how do we avoid the point like Jeff's talking about, we're about to go over the cliff? How do we avoid all the red? I mean, what do we do?
Personally, I think what you're doing right now is what needs to be done. You mentioned it in our conversation initially, and you need to plan for faster growth than you think, than the demographer might say, and then you don't get in that spot again. And that's I think the number one thing that the board has to keep in the back of their mind is a couple economic conditions change right now. We all see the rooftops going up, and we could be right back in the 500 to 700 students a year situation. And so you've got to stay diligent on planning ahead and realizing that attendance boundary change might be needed ahead of time before the housing market takes a boom again. And that could keep your numbers, at a more reasonable rate.
Right, so you give us a master plan in the spring or the summer, and then there's a boom, and man, you almost got to throw
It has
everything.
to maybe accelerate. I know one thing the demographer often says is, whatever the number may be, forever it was 14,000, and now we're almost there. You're gonna get to 14,000. It's just gonna depend on how quickly you get there, depending on the other conditions. I mean, we're gonna get to 15 and 16 and 17 and all these different numbers. I think to answer your question, we'll go to the last exercise that we were gonna do today. This was just to show, and this is something that came out in your comments about the demographic report. This is a chart that shows all of our middle schools. You can kind of see that flat line at the top there at design capacity of 3887. we just looked at about 80% of what our last functional capacity study last year was, and we think we actually have about an 80% functional capacity of somewhere around 3,700 students. And you can see there that, this year we're at about a little over 3,000. Next year we'll be at about 3,200. The next year we'll be at about 3,300. And by about 3031 or so, we're going to be hitting that really close to that utilization point, and we're going to be getting closer and closer to it. So as we talk about these, one of the things is we know we've got some space overall, as y'all pointed out, some space at South Belton. Rutgers said we were going to be at about 92 to 94% at our two northern, and about 71 to 72% at our southern campuses within a certain period of time. And so what we wanted to do to engage in the last discussion tonight, and we'll have a little bit of time to talk about it, is what are some strategies? These aren't all the strategies. We're certainly not recommending any strategies tonight, nor asking you to make a recommendation. But there were a few strategies that we thought we could look at and discuss around how do you start to evaluate and make plans to not get to that point where you're in a situation that's dire, that you can't get out of, that you can't support the needs of students. So a few of the things that we wanted to kind of put out tonight and just gather some thoughts on. This is something we should be doing all the time, and we are. It's even more important as you get closer to capacity, and that is make sure you look at your programming, look at your master schedule, look at your utilization rates. And I'll take another one. Like if you've been in Belton High School before, whenever it was really crowded before, how your master schedule set up your lunches at a big campus is important too. You can't have your master schedule set up in a way that one lunch has 200 students in it and one lunch has 700 students in it, because you don't have the facilities to support 700 students in a lunch. So another one might be to redraw middle school attendance boundaries to maximize balanced use of middle school capacity. Just to note that when you start adjusting secondary boundaries, you likely would probably go ahead and adjust your high school boundaries in that type of scenario as well. Another one would be one that we all love, not really, is to add portable classrooms to accommodate additional enrollment. Sometimes when it does get to you quicker than you anticipated and you haven't gone through a process so some of the other options, that may be the only option you have sometimes. But we want to get into a pattern that if we are forced to use portables, it's a short-term solution, not a long-term solution. Add middle school campus of choice. Maybe we add a middle school at New Tech. Maybe we add some programs of choice at other campuses that may not be at the same point in their capacity, and let students choose. Increase capacity at Lake Belton Middle School and Belton Middle School. What if we looked at a modernization and capital renewal project at those two campuses, who are two of our older campuses, and while we're at it, add 12 classrooms and increase capacity there and redraw lines. And then another option obviously would be at some point you build your fifth middle school too. So each of those have differing degrees of cost and investment. To build a middle school, you need to probably have your and we've got a chart, and I don't have it right in front of me, but I mean you're talking about passing a bond 4 to 5 years before you're ready to open it, so that you have time to get your plans done, get your design done, and then 24 months of construction, things of that nature. So you're talking about down the road stuff. But the question we wanted to ask is, looking at those solutions and any possible solutions that might be on the table, just discuss with your elbow partner or partners kind of what are your thoughts on possible solutions to this case study, but that could be applied universally. What is kind of appealing to you of those? Are there other solutions? Are there things that y'all hear about? But as we do look at these campuses that are going to hit capacity sooner than others, what discussion should we be having now? What should we be preparing our community for? And what should we be looking at based on the coming needs at North Belton? So we have a few minutes. We'll have a quick discussion.
All right, so
Question, when you do portable buildings, where does that fall in the budget?
your solutions, starting with the best and easiest to the worst.
And anytime we draw boundaries, we gotta get the expert in here and talk about the Voting Rights Act, right? That's all.
no, not about voting.
Say this is
We don't have to
easy.
do that?
Nope. This is all
That's
just
certainly,
attendance boundaries. This had nothing to do with
certainly
trustee
an
voting.
option that we have.
So it doesn't, that
Is it
trustee
gonna cost you
situation doesn't apply. In other words,
funding to help
if I had 1,000 voters in mine and Karen had 50, it doesn't matter.
that
Not
one,
since you already got yours
our,
approved. Now, the
our
next time,
bond expiration
the
can be
next
made
decade after
super
next
clear.
decade,
Our
Yeah, so it's only,
community
it's only
does
at
not
census
want this
time
as
that
a
we need
long-term
to.
solution.
Right.
It's a
It seemed
very
like she came to us
short-term
once before
solution, so
when we
we
didn't
could
have a
provide
census.
a little bit
Why
more
was
efficient
that?
construction on something.
Not sure, but I don't, when you change
Again,
your
this might
boundaries.
be
It doesn't matter.
build a program.
Because if you change your boundaries, you could be violating.
Well, this one.
When you change your
new
attendance
tech middle
boundaries, it's about
school,
student enrollment in a school, it doesn't
that
have
program
anything to
could
do
be
with
in
the
the
population in your district.
All we have to do
You're good to go as far as that's concerned.
All right, so we don't have to worry
That,
about that.
that's not a bad one. That might help your new
Well, I mean,
tech.
obviously, the easiest thing would be to
Students interested in
regulate boundaries.
Well, you're saying new tech, but there's also programs of choice.
At the other middle schools, yeah. I think this one's an intriguing one. As
I guess the question on this is,
You increase enrollment at one middle school, it's a little low, because you're doing a special program. Yeah.
when you do it, it could be great.
Give them something where they want to go.
Or maybe
Changing
fall
boundaries,
flat.
start having some natural
This
feeder
is not as
patterns.
fun. But it's neat. I know that I cut the line right here. These students go here, these students go right here.
This one you would have to really survey up front to narrow down ideas that the community really values and what's really helpful for kids.
Right.
So I think you'd have to really feel informed from our
So
community on
that
that one,
plays into it
surveys.
too, you know, there could be multiple reasons why you
Yeah,
That
yeah.
demographic.
We keep winning.
student success.
That's it. That's right. It spreads. Even if people don't want it, it just increases the
Updating on your disability.
You're gonna touch a school already.
Well, in both of those, Lay, Belton Middle School, I don't know. Well, no, Belton Middle School was the old 9.
But I think,
Yeah.
I do think.
Both of these
See, that wasn't
were
true when our
built,
kids were little, right?
and neither one of these were built to be middle schools, is that right?
It was the ninth grade center.
Yeah, when Seth
Abby
and
went
K,
to school there when it was still in middle school.
right,
Seth,
but when
yeah.
Seth and K came up, it was,
Yeah, it was
had
just a
been
freshman
for years.
But originally was Belton Middle School built as middle school?
No, it was built as an intermediate,
See,
fifth and
both-
sixth grade campus.
That's the challenge with both of those sites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the good thing about both those sites is both Belton Middle School
So that didn't come in.
and Lay.
Because you still have the same,
Actually
your
have
boundary is different than school attendance.
land mass where you can actually versus,
Stays the same.
you know, some of our other
That's the
campuses are so interlocked that you can't really add anything to it.
We could add
Or
on
like
and modernize.
charter.
And you ever, and you can't ever change
No, not
that
charter.
unless,
Every decade, you gotta go through a.
Remember, we went through a thing and looked at, hey, can we add, the way that Chisholm was designed, it's like, no, really, you can't. There's nowhere to go to do anything with it.
the census.
And of course, as we approach that end, those, all those discussions are easier because you only have to make a few changes to those elementary and high school.
I don't think so.
Approach that end number and says, we're not growing anymore, it's like, okay. And then you start tweaking everything along the way. You said 14,000? At least but that's not our maximum capacity.
Oh, no. That's just, that was the number, it seemed like he was like, y'all gonna hit 14. And we're there, so, you know, now it's
Because
gonna be.
in our
y'all gonna
maximum
hit
stuff,
15.
in our build out like 20-something thousand students.
Yeah.
Because that's 792 is
All right, we're gonna go ahead and share out on this one as well. And we'll start over on this side this time, so to be fair to everybody. What are y'all's thoughts on this?
So, I think we said we wanted to take a look at some of these strategies, maybe with some other variables attached to them, right? So, yeah, there's cost variables attached to these, like if we rank these from like least expensive to most expensive, right? Like that might be one dynamic that we could look at it as an example, right? So it's maybe hard to look at just this list purely. When we did look at it though, I think we had a couple favorite options in the near term. So the first bullet, right, evaluating programming and master schedule utilization rates, right? I mean, that's really a research exercise, right? From a cost standpoint, there's not a whole lot of cost there, right? But I think there are some things programming wise that we maybe could or should be doing to adjust some of this. We then kind of drop down to the fourth bullet, and in particular the last part of that fourth bullet, right? So look at programs of choice on other campuses. So for example, right, is there a program that we could put at South Belton Middle School, right, that would really attract students to South Belton Middle School, right? And so one thing that came up was maybe the continuation of the dual language program, right? Like, is that something that we look at? I think we weren't really ready to get into, middle school version of New Tech yet. At least our conversation wasn't ready to necessarily get into that, but I think that's pretty much where we.
Awesome, thank you.
Thinking along the same lines, if you change attendance boundaries, it doesn't cost you anything. The only thing that costs any money is, I'm sorry?
That's true, not dollars.
Yeah, not dollars. Some heartache with that. And then you start talking about normal feeder patterns and all that. But you don't have to spend any money.
Right.
Portable buildings, I was asking Matt, what budget, that comes out of the M&O budget. So the only thing that is any great expense would be that. Seemed like be the last thing to do. What program did you say, Chris? Add what program? As an example?
Right, so
Middle
take what we're doing at the middle school, right?
Okay.
Continue to, at the elementary school level,
Yeah.
right? And roll that up,
Yeah.
more.
That's a great
There's-
idea.
And there's lots of
Other things.
other things.
Sure.
that could-
That's a great
We
idea.
could also expand CTE down selectively, right? So you could take a CTE program and actually park it at the middle school level at, say, South Bend Middle, or, somewhere else. And that actually serves a couple different purposes, actually. So not only does it help us balance, attendance-wise, right? But there's actually some positive budgetary impacts of maybe doing that too.
Right,
So,
right.
Awesome.
yeah.
Great thoughts.
Dr. Golden, Jeff?
Real quick, because they've already said, I guess the couple things that we had talked about, because they've already hit it all, but one, the idea of the programming at everyone's, and I asked her, okay, that's not a definite. You don't know when you add a program to a campus, is it going to be successful? Whereas if I redraw lines, I know it's X, Y, and Z. I know exactly when I cut that line, I got 300 kids are going here. Versus, and she made a good point, said a situation where there's a lot of front work being done, polling parents, figuring out, okay, if we offer this program at this school, are the kids going to come? Because if they don't come, we just offered a program, didn't do us any good. But the other thing that we talked about, the unique thing about Lake Belton and Belton Middle School is you actually have land there at those two locations where you can build and expand those two schools. That's the only ones we have, but we actually have that ability there.
Very similar to what everyone has already said. I think the biggest thing was about the programs of choice, and then the same question that you just mentioned, Jeff, is if you have a program and then people will come, having that data that you can get beforehand, and then increasing capacity at Lake and BMS as well. But the big thing that we both talked about is being good stewards of what we have, and if you have capacity, making sure we utilize the 4 middle schools across the district before we build anything new.
Yeah, we also mentioned that, while we're evaluating the program and the master schedule, that maybe we have an increased presentation from you all about the master plan, so that we're always aware, whether maybe once, twice a year, that we cover that, so that the board is aware.
Yeah. Mike, having that, what Janet said about having the demographer, predictions and functional capacity at the side by side would be quite helpful.
We can get that. I think too, one other thing from that too is making sure that we are looking at, if we do accelerate again, what might that look like too?
Right.
Kind of a what if on more rapid growth. It's something that stuck out to me as well.
I'm going to throw maybe throw a negative suggestion out here. Right, I mean, as part of that program review, right, I mean, we have to take a look at, are there programs that we're offering today that just don't have the student body to back them up?
Right.
Right, and so while you don't ever want to talk about cutting a program necessarily, right, we gotta see what the data says, right, about some of the programs, and if the data isn't there to support it, you know, that's also a change that could be made, along these lines. Now, I'm not thinking of any program in particular, right? So-
No, but I think they already do that, because I know in my time on the board, we've ended some programs because the numbers just didn't support it anymore. So I think they do that, but I think that's more of a Gabby or Linda question.
Yeah, I think, you know, those are tough ones, but we're trying to get to a spot where we have some concrete data to be able to say, what are we trying to accomplish with said program, and is it producing desired results for our kids? And if we can't answer yes to those and back it up with the data, then we got more digging we gotta do. We have to wrap this part up. We've got a student showcase that it sounds like they're practicing down the hallway for us. So, Mike, anything in closing?
No,
real
just
quick
thank
for
you
our
so
board?
much. This is really good feedback. Have some areas that we can get back to you guys with more information on, but really wanted to kind of see where y'all were. You know, we do our demographic updates, but we don't slow down sometimes and ask what that data means to you. So I thought this was important tonight. So,
That's it.
thank y'all.
Well, that concludes our board workshop this evening. There'll be no further business. We are adjourned at 6:04 PM.